Hi everyone, this is the second lecture about yhat, which is a web service that allows you to deploy things like R functions and prediction algorithms built in R onto the web so that they can be accessed via an API. So in the first lecture I talked about how to write your function, how to load the data, how to deploy it onto the yhat platform, but I didn't talk about how you can access this function that you just deployed, and so that's what this lecture is about. And so I'm going to talk about just three very simple ways that you can access your algorithm now that it's been uploaded to the yhat server. Now, if I'm not a web programmer or a front-end developer by any definition of the word, so I'm not going to talk about how to build a website or how to build a JavaScript interface. But those who are can go ahead and use the REST interface, the REST API, and it's fairly straightforward to kind of build a web front end that can later be translated into like a mobile app or something like that. So I just want to talk about just the basic interface into your function that you've just uploaded to yhat. Recall last time that the function I talked about was a way to estimate what's the average level of pollution at any point in the United States. And the idea is that we took the U.S. EPA monitoring network, and if you gave it a point, it would find the closest monitors within a certain mile radius, let's say 20 or 30 miles that you specify, and it would just take the average of those monitors over that within that radius, and that would kind of be an estimate of the level of air pollution at any point in the United States. So now we've got that function uploaded into into yhat. How do we access it? So this is what I'm going to talk about in this lecture. So the first thing you're going to need to do is to go to the yhat website, which is just yhathq.com, and log into your account that you should have already created in order to upload your code in the first place. Once you've logged in, this is the dashboard that you'll see. This is my account here. You can see I've got my username here, and I've got my API key here, which is very important. I've only got one model uploaded here, and that's this pollutant model that we talked about. And you can see that I got the green symbol here, which means it's online. So that's a good sign. That means it's ready to run. So the first very simple way that you can run your model is just in the yhat website itself. So if I click on my model and I go to documentation, first it'll give you the REST API, the post URL that you can use to access it from another type of service, and I'll go back to that in a second. But you can actually type in some code right here into the box here, and it has to be valid JSON, so you have to be able to use that, understand that format. But that's a fairly straightforward format, mostly just associative arrays. So if you recall, our function takes three arguments. One's the latitude, the other is the longitude of the location where you want to make the prediction of air pollution, and the last is the radius, which determines the number of monitors that you look at. So let's just start typing away here. We'll type some JSON. So the first is the longitude, and I'll just say, what was Baltimore? It was minus 76.61, and then we want the latitude, which I believe was 39.28. And I've already messed it up. And the last is the radius, which we'll say, let's say 50 miles here. And we can hit save over here, and it will run our model. You can see that it ran our model, and the output again is going to be in a JSON format. So you can see this is the input. I gave it latitude, the radius was 50, the longitude was minus 76.61, and you can see that the average PM2.5 was 8.97 micrograms per meter cubed, and the average ozone was about 0.044 parts per million. And so that's basically the output that you'll get from your model, and it ran on the server because we already uploaded it. So that's a very simple approach, and you can kind of just test to see if your model is working or not. And you can see that it's thankfully it's working, so we can move on to some other approaches. So the second approach is just to access the API from within R itself. So one of the nice things about using a service like yhat is that if you want to distribute your function in your code, there may be large data sets. For example, we had to get all the entire EPA monitoring network data set that may be involved in running your code, and it would be really a little unwieldy to have to distribute the entire data set and all the kind of assorted data that go with it to every single person who wanted to run your code. So the nice thing is that now, even if you don't create a web app or anything fancy like that. If you want to distribute your functionality and your algorithm to other people, you can distribute a very lightweight function that just provides an interface into the code, and then the code itself can run on the server with all the data that's necessary. So the first thing I can do is just load the yhat package, which has not been installed, so I'll install it first. Okay, now that's been installed, I can actually load it. And the key function you're going to want to use here is called the yhat.predict function, which basically calls your code and sends it the input data. But the first thing we're going to want to create is a little data frame that has the input data. So I'll call it df, and it'll be a data frame. And again, it has to have those variables. So the latitude is going to be, let's say, 39.28. The longitude is going to be minus 76.61, and the radius will be, maybe we'll try 60 miles this time. So that's going to be my input data frame. You can see it looks like this. And then I want to call yhat predict. Oh, sorry, excuse me. Before I call yhat predict, I need to create my configuration variable. And so I can create I'll just call it yhat.config, and it's going to be a vector containing my username, API key, and the URL. So first is going to be my username, and it's just my email address here. Next is my API key, and that's going to have to cut and paste from the website here. Oops. And the last is the environment here, which is just going to be just the first part of this URL here. Okay, so I've got my yhat.config vector, and I've got my input data, so I just need to call the yhat.predict function to get my predictions out. So I can call yhat.predict. And you give it the model name pollutant, as you recall, and just the input data here. And you can see that the results of the model come back relatively quickly. I've got my input here, my latitude, my radius, and my longitude here, and then I've got the PM 2.5, which is 8.9 micrograms per meter cubed, and ozone is about 0.44 parts per million. So that you can actually send it a whole data frame of latitude, longitude, and radius. You don't have to just give it one at a time. I just decided to give it one. So you could give it a whole. Your data frame could have many rows, and it will make the prediction just based on the way that we wrote the function. And it will interpolate. Depending on no matter what latitude or longitude you give it, it will interpolate based on taking local averages of monitors within 60 miles of the location that you specified. So that's a really nice, lightweight way to make a prediction function available to people without having to give them the entire data set and everything else involved. They can just run a really small little function and get the same kind of power that you would get by kind of downloading an entire R package. So the last way I'm going to talk about accessing the yhat API is it's very simple. It just uses curl from the command line, but you can actually use curl to kind of to send information to the website, and it will send you something back in JSON. And so this is a relatively primitive way to do things, but it's something that can be embedded in a script, in a much larger script written in a more kind of appropriate scripting language. So you can just call curl from the command line if you have it installed. If you don't have it installed, don't worry too much about it. But you just give it the post argument, and you can tell it that JSON is coming its way. And then you give it your user information, so it's going to be your username, a colon, and then your API key, which again I need to look up. So it'll be here, and I'll paste it in. The next thing I need to do is give it the data. So again, this has to be valid JSON, so it's a little awkward to type, but we can do it here. So the longitude, again, is going to be minus 76.61. The latitude is 39.28, and the radius is going to be 60. So it's not unlike when we were typing it into the website itself. And then we just need to give it the URL for the model. So you can find that on your dashboard again if you go to if you click on the model and go to the documentation. Now you need to paste in this entire thing here. So I'll paste that in. And you can see that when I sent the model out, so the data out, the model comes back with the data that you would expect: my input, my latitude, my radius, my longitude, and again it gives me the PM 2.5 and the ozone that we got, which is the same result that we got when we called it from R. So again, the output's in JSON. You'll probably need a post-processing type of script to kind of process the JSON and put it in a format that is a little bit more readable. But again, this is something you can embed in a shell script in a Perl or a Python type of script. So that's kind of a nice way to embed a yhat type of algorithm that you've deployed into more of a kind of systems programming type of framework. Okay, so that was the 3 very simple ways to access a yhat algorithm, and so I talked about accessing it from R, using the website itself to just kind of type some code, and also using curl to directly call the website from the command line. So there are obviously many other ways that you could access the API that yhat provides, and I'm not going to talk about them here, but for example, web front ends would be the most kind of obvious way. There are a lot of examples on the yhat website of kind of web apps that you can develop using the kind of prediction algorithms deployed on their back end. So I encourage you to take a look at their documentation, take a look at the examples that they've got there, and to see what you can deploy and what would be kind of interesting to run. So that's it for yhat. There's a lot I could talk about, but I think I want to leave it there. Just so I encourage you to kind of try the service out, try to deploy some functions, get things running, and then take it from there.